to everyone who is here. Thank you for joining us. I know it's the end of the year and I know things are really busy, but we appreciate so much that you're here with us. And just quickly, for people who are unfamiliar with VGL and who we are basically a global leadership community. And what we've done in the past, what VGL does, is we bring together experts and leaders like this in our forum. We share best practices and insights, and we challenge big picture thinking in an open space. We will be together for an hour and a half, for 90 minutes. VGL also has different programs that we run for organizations and leaders and teams and groups. And we also do something called VGL Insights, which is sharing that information and added value. And of course, the VGL Forum, which we're here today. And moving on, before I get into the research, I always forget to introduce myself. So my name is Pari Namazie. I am very bad at introducing myself, never learned that well. What do I do? So I am part of Vienna Global Leaders, which I sort of co-founded, and Vienna Global Leaders is powered by UNEPA, which is a company that I run with my partner and husband, and it stands for Eurasian Nexus Partners. I'm a coach and a leadership facilitator, and I absolutely love what I do. And I love hosting the VGL Forum. It brings me a lot of joy to share this event with you and to find amazing speakers, which we do have today. And moving on, why we're talking about leadership transitions very, very shortly is, I'll tell you a little bit more about it, but this is a research project that I started about a year ago. And it was really from working with different leaders and helping them through their transitions. And it was so fascinating that the stories seemed quite similar in the sense that the research shows that people who transition, leaders who transition, always come up and say, you know, this is not how I expected it would go. And most of them were very unprepared, even though you are you know, competent and come with so many years of experience, but somehow it's thrown into this uncharted territory and this uncertainty of what to expect, what's going to happen. So it comes with a lot of different emotions. And just moving to the next slide, what we find in transitions is there's so many different challenges. It's the inner experiences, and it's not only leadership transitions, but it's also life transitions. You can't really separate the two. And the inner experiences that people talk about is, it comes with excitement and pride and high self-esteem, but it also comes with that fear and anxiety and confusion and self-doubt. And they all come together, all of these emotions. And it's like you're thrown on this roller coaster of different emotions and expectations. And so it's a very challenging time, but also a time where, as you have said, a lot of growth happens. So moving on, just one more slide on transitions. When I started doing this research, both with the leaders that I was researching and also the literature, what was really interesting is how we combine leadership and life. You cannot separate the two. And part of that human development literature was looking at transitions as the end of childhood, the age 30 transition, the midlife transition, and beyond midlife. And the end of childhood is maybe that phase of where someone is becoming an adult, you know, in their 20s. And maybe for you, you've experienced that. It's the time you leave home. It's the first time you're on your own and you go out of your comfort zone. Really scary. Yeah, just remember that moment, that maybe how it was for you. And then the age 30 transition is when you start becoming part of a tribe, when you start a family, when you join an organization, when you create more associations. And the midlife is that strange part of life. They sort of say it starts from your 40s and goes into the 50s. And it's, some people call it a midlife crisis. To others, it's a midlife awakening, which I like that one, because it's sort of that space where you have your career. Perhaps if you have children, they've grown up. they're leaving the nest, but then you also have elderly parents, and it's this sort of balance of life. And beyond midlife, interestingly, in the Eastern philosophy, they talk about wisdom, and it's that time where we give back. So it's really interesting to look at it in this light as well. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speakers. We have amazing, amazing speakers today. And all three of these speakers have been part of our research project. And we'll tell you a little bit more at the end about the research project. We'd love you, if you're interested in this work, we'd love you to join us and be part of the project. And in a minute, I'm going to hand over to each of them. But Torsten and Elizabeth and Jim, they are each in different transition phases of their lives. And that's the story that they're going to share with you. I won't tell you more about it, but you'll hear it in their stories of which transition they're in. So I'm going to hand over, and we're going to do it in this order of actually having Torsten and then Elizabeth and then Jim speak. And you'll realize why we've decided, suggested to speak that way. Torsten, if you wouldn't mind starting with an introduction to yourself, who you are, where you are, what you are, who you are, and a fun fact about you. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks. First of all, a big thank you for getting the opportunity to be with you. I'm really feeling humbled and excited to be invited to this forum and seeing so many interested folks among us. Who am I? I think I shared with you, Pari, it's not so easy to always talk about yourself, but yeah, a couple of facts. So I'm Torsten Schuster. I am an HR professional at Intel. I guess you know Intel as the global silicon manufacturing company. And in my work, I focus on leadership development. So this is my passion. And I'm also a leadership coach. It's my personal kind of purpose to help others to grow. But at the same time, also, I want to grow myself. So that's kind of course, a big piece. Growth is my mantra. And yeah, I'm based in Munich, in Germany. And the fun fact or the picture or maybe the kind of the image that I want to keep for this call today here is I'm in the rush hour of life. That's what I would call it. I've just noted down kind of the 4 stages, Pari, that you mentioned. And I think it's somewhere between the age 30 and what you call the midlife. I would call it the rush hour. Why do I call it the rush hour? Well, I have a wonderful job that I really love and really as a great opportunity. At the same time, I have other roles. I'm father of 3 kids, and the oldest one is 6. So they are rather small. And I guess, you know, when you have kids, they are demanding. Your job is demanding, kids are demanding. I have a wonderful wife, and she's a professional as well. So she's working full time as well. So it's about, when I say rush hour of life, it's about kind of balancing all the needs I have, the needs the business has, the needs of my kids, the needs of the entire system, the family system. And yeah, so that's me. Does this suffice, Pari?
Yeah, thank you, Torsten. And I just throw one last question before we move to Elizabeth. When you hear the word transition, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, transition. I think there is, and I saw it actually in the comments, I think there is a mixture of excitement, but also some kind of fear or uncertainty. And for me, it's kind of, I would always call it an opportunity. And I think it's mostly an opportunity to reinvent yourself.
Okay.
Reinvent yourself, who you are, and to learn, and as well as to unlearn things. So, yeah.
You know, I'm going to pick that question up later with you about what did you reinvent in yourself, but we'll come back to that later. And Elizabeth, welcome. And we'd love to hear about you, who you are, where you are, what you are, and also a fun fact. And when you hear the word transition, what does it mean to you?
So, yes, thank you, Pari. Thank you to the other panelists and the participants. I'm Elizabeth Sáenz. I'm from Venezuela. I'm a medical doctor, pediatrician by background. I then moved into public health as a specialist. And it was this specialty that opened me the doors of working in international organizations. And I've been working for more than 10 years, 20 years now, sorry, 10 years. Yeah, it's been quite a journey moving from the clinical practice to the more bureaucratic kind of work that we do in international organizations. But this is mostly in line with what I consider is my purpose in life, which is to heal, which is to heal people, to bring well-being and health. I am in Geneva at the moment. I live and work in Vienna for 19 years. And since last year, I was assigned as liaison officer of my agency now in Geneva. So yes, there has been a lot of transition. There has been a lot of change in the past years. A fun fact about me, I always say that I'm a tropical animal. I have now lived more years of my life in very cold countries rather than my tropical, warm and nice countries. And when I hear the word transition, for me, of course, there is this sense of fear and uncertainty, but I would say above all is about opportunity and self-reflection and discovery of new opportunities.
Thank you, Elizabeth. A warm welcome. And finally, we hand over to Jim. Jim had a little bit of a hiccup, so he's not where he should have been, but he's sitting in Chicago Airport. But,
story of my life, exactly. Little hiccups. So,
but it's a warm welcome, Jim. And go ahead, tell us about you.
aloha, everybody. I'll just start with, to me, transitions are largely about perception. If you were to ask my wife, she would say I'm transitioning from being a teenager to an adult, but she's been saying that for 35 years. So I love her optimism, and it's probably never going to change. I'm at that part of my life where I have retired from the U.S. Department of State as a diplomat, and my wife and I have set up our own company, coaching and leadership training and a little bit of consulting here and there. And let's see, a fun fact about myself. Yeah, I don't know if there's any fun facts about me. I just, my wife and I, you'll be shocked to know, are just loving returning to Hawaii and loving every day of being there. And when I think about transitions, I think about life. I was a military brat growing up. I've moved constantly and transitioned constantly for 61 years. And so to me, just transitioning is part of being alive.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, each of you. We're going to go into a session where we go a little deeper with each of you. And to bridge that, what we'd love to do is before Torsten starts sharing a little bit deeper about his story, we'd love to invite you to answer a poll question. Here is the poll question, which is, in which age group do you think are the hardest transitions? Is it in your 20s? Is it in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s? So what we're seeing right now is the hardest is in the 30s. And very close behind that are the 20s. Really interesting. And equally are 40s and 50s. 40s just went up slightly. Very interesting. And I'd love to hear in the chat box why you think the 30s and 20s are the hardest transitions. What's difficult about them? And I love that you think the 60s is not hard. I'm soon going into my 60s. That's good to know. And 70s is a little difficult too. Well, we'll have to hear about that. Wonderful. Yes, so some of the feedback I'm hearing is maturity. Hormones, I think so too. You're right, Sophia. Hormones plays a lot with that. The first rounds of transition, very true. And 20s of becoming an adult. Yeah. So I'm going to close this poll. Coming from childhood, it's like the fun and easy part of life, to serious and real world, the start of it all, starting a family. Very, very true. Very true. And so I'm 54 years old. When I look back on my 30s, really challenging 30s and 40s. Adaptability. It's harder to accept, learn, and change things when you're much older. Yeah, and also other comments. The world stands open and it is time to make many decisions. 40s, you start realizing the truth. 30s, because I felt the rush hours mentioned. Yes, true. Married, family, career. Thank you, everyone, for that. So as you said, the 30s are the most challenging. Actually, the poll result changed slightly, with the 40s following, and then the 20s. So very interesting. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Torsten. And Torsten, we'd love you to tell us a little bit more about, when you talk about rush hour. We all think transitions are fun and exciting, but it would also be nice to hear what's the toll it takes on us. But perhaps you could explain your transition first, where you are, which transition in life you'd like to share with us. And if we will have a Q&A, but if you have questions specifically for Torsten, keep them in the chat box and we can pick them up later. Torsten, we hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, interesting results, which kind of relate to how I see the world. So I think, first of all, I think there is a certain, how you call it, transition muscle that you build up over time. And so I can relate that maybe the hardest transitions are rather in your early stages. But I'm biased. I'm in the middle of the spectrum, so I haven't experienced kind of the entail, the 60s, the 70s still to explore. But I can relate to this. And well, where am I? So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm somewhere in the middle, right? The rush hour of life. My transition is, well, I'm established in the professional arena, so to say, and now it's about this transition into a growing family over time. So I would say every 2-3 years, we kind of got an addition to our family, and which is just as we were hoping for. And now we are in this space where, well, I am in this space. I mean, I share it actually with my wife, so I say we, where it's less just about me or us, where it's more about a system that we have to manage. And I think this is the key transition that I've made over time, from being by myself, of course, someone my wife joined, and then we grew our family. And one of my key values is actually freedom, independence. I learned this over time, and I honor this. And now I need to kind of transition into, how do I interpret freedom, independence differently as we are growing, as I have to take responsibility for a system, as there are expectations from my kids, but as well from the business. So it's this stepping into managing a system, a broader a view, and not just making decisions and being able to make decisions for yourself, which also impacts, of course, transitions in my business life. What changes can I take on as next? I would have ideas, I would have expectations, but of course it needs to be somehow as part of this entire system, because it doesn't help if I optimize myself and then someone is suffering in the system because it fires back at someone I will suffer as well. So it's this getting into this rush hour, it's holding this rush hour of life, and it's managing, keeping balance and energy. This is my transition. I guess that was the key question, Pari. Remind me, was there more that you kind of pinged me?
I'd love to explore a little bit with you, because we also want to share hard truths. You know, it's not all easy. So what decisions were right for you and what decisions were wrong?
Oh, good question. I don't categorize decisions into bad or good. I think at the end, for me at least, either you take decisions or you don't, and for good reasons, for whatever reason. Sometimes it's good to just postpone a decision until there's maturity of the situation, and then you have clarity and you go on. You mentioned at the beginning, transitions also have a lot of uncertainty. So sometimes it's maybe good to wait. But when making a decision, I think there is not a bad decision. It's just either you progress or you learn. I mean, at the end, it's the same, right? But I don't regard bad or wrong decisions. It's rather being careful about what perspectives to include. As I just mentioned, to be aware, now it's not the time anymore to just optimize myself and make decisions for myself based on all the needs that I have, of course. No, it's not more about now listening. And I think that's a comparable skill into the business world as well, right? If you do transitions into a new role, listening about what is expected, what needs are there, what history is there in the system that needs to be taken on. So I think that's there's not a bad decision. No, not at all.
And Torsten, you mentioned like one of your values being freedom. And I loved how you also talked about that it's now maybe not the time for me to explore my freedom, but it's the system. What does that mean for you when you talk about freedom today? What is that value? How do you honor that value of freedom?
How do I honor it? I mean, well, the environment has changed, as we all know, in the past 2 years, and of course there are good sides, there are bad sides. COVID is a challenging disease that we have. I have to say, and we all know, it also offers some opportunities, and especially in this system that I'm now holding, it offers me actually to still live independence and freedom. Working from home has enabled me a lot. That's what I honor. I'm really, really happy about this time that I save, that I have for my family, that I don't need to transition to somewhere. So I honor being in the present now here. I invite, is it my peers at work? Is it my kids, my family, to really use this freedom, this environment, which is more flexible, which is less rigid. So I think a couple of things have come together. Yes, there's my value. Yes, the system that kind of puts some boundaries, but also the environment that is currently changing and holds a lot of opportunities, and I use them where possible.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Torsten. I have a lot more questions for you, but I'm going to wait on those and hand over to Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing that. If you have any questions to our audience, please, for Torsten, anything you'd like to dig a little bit deeper on, or something, if you're at your rush hour and you have something that you'd like to ask or share, please go ahead and put that in the chat box. And in the meantime, then let's hand over, before we go to Elizabeth, we have another poll question. And this also relates a little bit to what Elizabeth is going to talk about. What do you think are the top 3 inner characteristics that leaders need for a successful transition? And I think we can just put it in in the chat box over here. Let's do it that way. So one is a good sense of humor, or do you think it's openness? Thanks, Laura. Openness to change, an ability to learn, ability to deal with uncertainty, flexibility, resilience, empathy, focus, or whatever word that comes to your mind. And I can see some people just typing that in over there. Agility, humility, willingness to learn. What else? Joanna, perseverance, vision, again, willingness to learn something new, Navid, resilience, Holger, thank you, all of the above. Yeah. I also love the learning agility and a learner mindset. Very, very true. So let's hand over to Elizabeth and hear from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I know you're going to tell us about a different life transition. And what we'd love to hear is what has been your biggest challenge in this transition, and also what you became aware of about yourself. So please start with your story so everyone knows what transition you're in, and we'll give you the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Pari. And well, I was fascinated listening to Torsten and also relating to many things of his story. But in my case, I went through Torsten's phase when I had small children, and I had my commitments and the responsibilities of I used to call it like the family plan. Yeah, I cannot have my own plan. There is a bigger plan, a bigger purpose of everything. So I would say that it was a sort of staying in the comfort zone, but also making sacrifices in the sense that in those years, because of those conditions, I wasn't moving in my career or progressing in my career at the speed or with the level of growth that I would have expected. And because that also meant that in the organization that I'm working, mobility and going to different institutions is a good way of moving forward in your career development. But I made the decision because of my family, because of my circumstances, I stayed here. So I was at a point in my life, in my personal life, where I'm 58 now, my children have grown, they left the house, they were in university, so working, etc. And then I found myself, okay, maybe things are starting to move for me, and maybe there is a chance. So I started thinking, what if I move here, I move there, I consider other options. But then it took the most traumatic experience in my life so far to really think about, yes, I definitely change. So I really went through a very personal, difficult situation, a separation, and what I can say this thing to the audience because probably many of you have gone through. So these are difficult circumstances in your private life. It's not a newborn crying every morning for food, but it's to managing your emotions, having to deal with many other parallel issues, but then realizing that you need a change, that you need to move from where you are, move from that comfort zone, where work in many ways was probably the only fixed thing that I had in my life. The only pathway that I knew was for sure was my work. And even with that, I decided I need to change. I need to move somewhere. And luckily enough, I think that when we are ready, then the opportunities come, because there was this possibility of moving to a new position within my organization. Therefore, I moved to a new position, but also to a new country, to a new city, and working to a new organization. With a new organization, because my position is liaising in a new country, in a new city, with other international organizations that have similar mandates to mine. So when I saw this position and I applied and I was notified of my selection, of course I was scared. But at the same time I was thrilled. This is what I have been waiting for many years. I knew what I had to do. I had very clear terms of reference. And I was so excited that this opportunity was going to give me what I needed at the time. Personally, on one side, even though I was very scared, because for the first time I was going to be in an environment I didn't know. I didn't mention new language, because after being struggling in Vienna, trying to learn German for more than 90 years, unsuccessfully, of course, then I moved now to a city where French is the main language, even though I continued to work in English. So I was notified of my selection for this position on the 6th of March 2020. I have been traveling 19 times. I had 19 trips in 2019, and I had already had my 2 missions in 2020, and I was notified of my selection for this position in Geneva on the 6th of March, and on the 11th of March, Dr. Tedros from WHO announced the pandemic, and on the 12th of March, we went to this lockdown. So I said to myself, no, I have a new job. I need to go somewhere else. I need to move from Vienna. So it took until the 20th of July. Of course, in May, when in Austria everything was open and I was able to go to my office, I was determined to prepare everything for the moment they announced the flights were open again. And I decided to move definitely to Geneva for my new position, for my new job at the end of July. So it was a very difficult process, in many ways very challenging. I had to detach from many things. I had to move, but then also to come to a new place in very particular circumstances, because I was also moving to a country where everything was closed. Shops were closed, everything had to be done online, restaurants were closed, and of course offices were closed. So it meant that I had to liaise with an organization where everybody was working from home. So the key activities of my new role, which were mostly meeting people, explaining the mandate, explaining what I came to the city to do, and in this new position was very challenging. But in closing, I think that for me, it has been probably one of the most exciting times in my life, despite the challenges, the difficulties, the fears, the fact that I moved to a very expensive country now, so I have had even to learn new home financing skills. But above all, it's been a process of self-discovery, of self-realization. I have discovered strengths in me that I didn't know I had. From I had never in my life made a contract for a phone or electricity in my house. Sorry, I manage at work huge global programs on treatment of drug use disorders, and I had never made sign a contract for a house on my own, because it was my past life. I had to rediscover myself and reinvent myself on things that, believe me, I thought were very complicated. So as I started to move and discover this new city, this new country, this new job, but this new Elizabeth, I have to say that I am a different person. I'm a different professional. I'm a different mother for that. I am sorry, I didn't say I'm a mother of 2 adult children already. And I think I'm even a new mother because I have discovered a new me through this process of transition. And just sorry if I'm prolonging myself, but just to say, because I'm linking to what Torsten was saying, I don't know what changes you more. What is it the work that makes you transition in your life, or is it life that makes you transition in your work? Because I know many colleagues in my organization that sometimes decide to move, for example, to another country because they want to raise their family in a more conducive environment for them to have a bigger house where they can, while other people, move to bigger cities where life is very hectic, and then the families have to also cope with all these challenges that work is bringing to one. So I think that in my case, it was my personal circumstances that maybe one is changed, but at the same time, this change has changed a lot of my personal circumstances, and it has been exhilarating. So thank you, Pari. This is what I would like to share.
Elizabeth, what a beautiful story. Thank you so much for your honesty, for your vulnerability. I think everyone also really appreciated that. Thank you. Hearing you talk about your story, I could feel all of this being thrown into this unknown. Everything was new, and going through a personal change of your own life, and then also taking on this challenge in a professional setting, but that everything over there is new, and on top of it coming to this new country and hitting COVID. It's like poof, transition after transition after it's like, when they say suddenly everything happens all at once, it sounded very much like everything happened. And can I ask you, one thing that came to my mind was, what gave you the strength to continue? What pushed you forward?
Well, I think that work played an important role in that. Because I'm the only person in the other office now, I hire a group of volunteers, interns, very young people starting their careers. And there was a very strong bond from the beginning with these young people. And when I saw that, the way I was managing the team, I'm sorry to say that I even discovered many of my leadership skills through this process, Pari. I didn't know I was a leader, to be honest. I wasn't that conscious of my leadership abilities at the time. But this commitment, I wanted to prove to myself, to the organization, to my colleagues, to everybody that I could do this. Yeah. And I love my job. I love what I do. I like and communicate to my organization, to the principles, to the values, to the so that was driving me all the time. This desire to do. Again, I always go back. I say I'm always a pediatrician. I'm always dealing with babies that have the best communicators. When a child, I always said I love about pediatrics is that children don't lie. When you have healed the child because you get a smile, because they start running, after being 1 week in bed, incubated, whatever. Next day they, they are running in the corridors of a hospital. So I always go back to my pediatrician heart, and I think that seeing that there was a response from the team, that we were achieving things, that despite COVID, despite not being able to see people face to face, things were happening, that I was conveying the message. And I think I've never been so happy with my work as I am now. And I have been working literally since March 2020 from home. I don't like, some people have the option of going 20%, 2 times a week. There is no office for me yet. So I have even grown a lot as we saw my challenges with technology. That's another big transition from being completely illiterate to being able to have a conference in Zoom. It's been a fascinating process. And if I have to tell somebody something, is trust yourself, you're going to be able to do it. Irrespective of all the words I have been reading in the chat, uncertainty, being concerned, being scared, and no, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. That was beautiful, very inspiring. Megla writes, listening to Elizabeth has shed light on another key skill, which is to have courage and to believe in yourself and tackle unforeseen obstacles as they come with resilience. And I know all of you have that, all of us in transition. Somehow we think we might not, but when you're pushed to it somewhere, I think that comes through. And I am thinking of a few transitions which haven't worked out as well. So somewhere that doesn't work. Elizabeth, thank you for that. And again, in the chat box, if you'd like to ask or share anything, please go ahead and do that. I really appreciate your story, Elizabeth. And I'd love to pass on and move on to Jim. And Jim has another very, very powerful story to share. I have learned to do the polls, I think, now. So we have one other poll question, which we'd like to share before we hand over to Jim. And the poll question is this one. What do you think are the top 3 reasons that transitions fail? Is it due to poor planning? Is it due to insufficient training, that the leader hasn't got enough training? Is it inadequate leadership? Is the new job a bad fit for the leader? Is it because of the family? Is it because expectations did not match the new job? What do you think are the top 3 reasons that transitions fail? So what is showing as our top result is that expectations did not match the new job. As our second and third reason is poor planning and inadequate leadership. And also, coming in third place would be insufficient training and the family can't adjust. And on that, I'd love to hand over to Jim. And Jim, question to you is, I know you have experienced that's such an international role, but tell us a little bit about your story and your transition. I love the fact that you're now retired, but would maybe when you explain the transition, a leadership transition you went through, it would also be nice to hear what support you could have received from your organization. So go ahead, Jim.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks for the wonderful stories, Torsten and Elizabeth. So I'd say for me, this transition from retirement to whatever the heck I'm doing now has been shockingly easy, because I started thinking about this 20 years ago. And so one of the nice things about my organization is they actually encourage you to take a mid-career retirement plan. They help you look at your finances. They help you think about what you want to do. And so I always knew my wife and I were going to return to Hawaii. She made that very clear. So that helps to have clarity from your spouse. And then I'm never going to stop working. I love doing things that I love doing. So I intentionally planned to go back and get my master's degree. I kind of stumbled into coaching. So I got certified as a coach. And my plan always was to do something that I love doing every day. And so it started with really thinking about, and I think this is my theme as well, is that getting to know yourself and figuring out what's true for you and what's not necessarily what your company wants from you or your family, but what's really true for you. And that's worked for me in all my transitions. And so it's been amazingly seamless, shockingly easy for both my wife and me. And I think for me, the one big thing that I don't have that some of my friends had as they were trying to do this similar transition is their sense of self, their ego was wrapped up in their job. Yeah, for me, it's like, ciao, baby, I'm out of here. Not that I didn't love my work, but it was time to do something else. And the ones that we actually have a retirement class when we do retire from the State Department, I'd say about half the people in there were kind of shell-shocked because their identity, their sense of who they were locked up in their titles. So again, that's some personal work that you need to do. On the international travel, moving internationally, I find that most large companies who do this do it rather well because they spend a ton of money on moving people around. And they want to make sure that they hire the right person, they get the training and go someplace. The State Department was pretty good about that. And I've seen most other companies, because they are paying so much money in salary and benefits as people move, they don't want these sunk costs to be for naught. And they're normally picking people that they have high expectations for, that they want to get this broader experience. Where they do fail, from my perspective, very often is not taking care of their families. The State Department tries to do that. My wife always used to tell me that, Jim, you go someplace and you're automatically important, right? You have a job title, you have work, you have busyness. I go someplace and I just have me. I have to recreate my circle of friends. I have to find work. And that can be really stressful. And it's one of the key reasons why people in the State Department leave. Their families aren't happy with moving around, or they're not satisfied with what's going on in the opportunities that they have overseas. And they're very often treated as second-class citizens by the corporations, right? And the other part that people get really lost on is there's a social component to this as well, right? They get focused on their business and what has to happen at work, and they don't take care of themselves outside of work. I know when I had new people coming to work for me overseas, the number one thing I would always tell them, get your family settled. You're worthless to me until your spouse is happy and your kids are happy, because you're just going to be an unhappy camper. And the other advice was, get settled in what you're supposed to do in the office. Get your basic skills down, get your networking done, and then we'll talk about how to expand that. So I don't expect you to arrive on the first day being 100% ready to go. Take your time, catch your breath, take care of your family, take care of yourself, and then we'll go from there. I think I forgot a question you asked me there, Pari, but
it was also the support you would have liked to have received from your organization.
I never expect anything from my organizations going to what is the main problem is expectations. I have zero expectations. It would have been nice if they could have given me a little bit more training or a little bit more X, Y, and Z. But, I guess that as long as I felt that I would be comfortable doing what they asked me to do, I was okay. I'm pretty flexible. I mean, I've been doing this my entire life. So it's pretty, I know myself well enough to know where I'm going to struggle and what I need to do. So I think managing my expectations is probably the key to my success.
Yeah. And you talked about so many interesting things, Jim. You talked about ego, you talked about identity. And then, of course, this whole thing of not looking after the family. Vincent writes this in the chat box, happy wife, happy life. It's so true. It's so much the family as well. And, making sure the family is well adjusted. You talked about the family, getting the family settled, and you also talked about getting settled in your office, in your job. What advice would you, how would you do these things? How could someone prepare for that better, do you think?
It's much easier these days with social media and with the ability to put people together. It used to be you'd have to find schools for kids or work for spouses. And so again, I think it's really sitting down with the family and helping to manage expectations. Believe it or not, in the State Department, the hardest transitions for people are very often going to Europe, right? Because they have these amazing expectations about what Europe's going to be like. And they get there and they realize, okay, first, it's not America. Second, the place where we're going to be living is much smaller than we're used to. We're still going to have a long commute. The jobs are going to be hard and they're going to be understaffed. So very often it's that managing expectations. It's hard for them. And so that starts before people come. You send them a welcome note, you introduce them, say, let me help you manage expectations so you can begin to think about this. And then making sure the State Department was really good about having what we called sponsors to take care of the families, a family sponsor, somebody that had kids that could help introduce them to the schools. You're not going to be perfect for everybody. And I really believe that a lot of this starts with yourself, right? That this is who you really have to be honest with yourself and your wife. My wife tells everybody that the smartest thing I ever did was when I passed the Foreign Service exam, I went and told her, Leilani, we passed the Foreign Service exam, that if we're going to do this, we're going to do this together. Because she was giving up an amazing job. She was earning more money than I was at the time. And the moment that she said, and the question was, do you want to do this or not? And the moment that she committed to it, she and I own the process together. And so that always, in my view, helps, right? Making sure that we all own this process together and that we're not deciding by ourselves. The only job I ever took without my wife's permission was that when they offered me the job in Milan. I thought that was safe. It worked out pretty well.
It was safe, right?
It was reasonably safe.
She'd like that too.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
But very true what you said, and I think it was resonating a lot with everyone. This is what people were also mentioning in the chat box about managing expectations, really important. And I love that you also shared that example about what happened in your organization to manage those expectations, to have sponsors, and what you did with others to help manage their expectations. And really good advice over there. For just one last question for you, in your opinion, when you look back over your career, did your transitions get easier? What changed for you in transitions?
So I got much better at managing my expectations, and my wife and I got much better at having these conversations up front, right? As often as we tried, sometimes there were some communication problems, and we just got better at it. But I think even if you were to ask my wife, she would say we never had a bad transition. That it's the old Chinese story that you you take with you what you find places. If you're reasonably happy, reasonably well adjusted, you're probably going to find that elsewhere too. And if you're not, you're going to take your problems with you.
Yeah, very, very true. Thank you for that, Jim. There are just a comment that Jeremy's posted in. I'll read that in a minute. We'll take a few questions. So if anyone wants to add any questions for Torsten, for Elizabeth, or for Jim, please do that. Otherwise, we go to the next round where we have a panel discussion with them. And some observations. Jeremy writes, before social media and Gmail, remember aerograms and recorded cassettes to family and friends. Those were the days, right? Remember how fun it was when you'd actually get a letter in the post and you'd have to wait a long time for that. And also a lot of expats who failed or underperformed in Milan. Jeremy lived there. So when he lived there, as they expected, it would all be Dolce Vita, a very special place. And Jeff writes, no geographic solutions. Yeah, excellent. So tell me, I will wait a minute to see if there are other questions or comments or reflections that you'd also like to do on your own transitions. You can share that with us in the chat box. While we are waiting, Torsten, I have to come back and ask you this question because you threw out the word about reinventing yourself. And I'd love to know how you have reinvented yourself.
How I have, I guess it's the process, right? I'm in the process of reinventing, I'd say. I think a key feature based on where I am now is to let go of things. One thing that I feel, and there may be many other things, but you know, my self-awareness is also limited. But one thing is really about letting off of control and allowing things to happen and not being the one who kind of oversees everything. It's certainly different when you are by yourself and you make decisions for yourself. You control your life, your next steps, and you're only responsible to yourself. But you know, stepping into the system, you can't control everything. And I now learn it with my kids. So my oldest one is just 6, so still small, but he steps into making his decisions and letting go of this control to make decisions for him that I got to use in the past years as he was little. Something I just feel, wow, I have to just allow and to step back. Sometimes I fail. Sometimes I just see what happens and I learn afterwards and grow this muscle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's such an important skill, letting go. I think we hone that learning through our entire life. There's so many things we cannot control, and how to let go and live without holding on to what should have been or could have been and things like that. All right, Sophia, isn't that rather early at the age of 6? I'm trying to, you mean how Torsten was talking about with his 6-year-old learning to let go? Yes, exactly. I must say, I can relate to that with even a 6-year-old. You know, the sort of, I remember the 2s when they had the tantrums at the age of 2. You almost start learning that skill from that age. Jeremy has a question, and I read that. It's, what are the main differences between externally triggered transitions and internally motivated ones? It's a good question, Jeremy. Who'd like to take that? Elizabeth, Torsten.
I wanted to say something about the age of 6, because I remember when I had to move to Vienna, my daughter was 7 and my son was 2. And I remember that one of the most painful things for me was to choose. We were only paying for 1 cubic meter of things. And I remember one of the most painful things to do was to decide which toys I should bring with my children, which were those they were more attached to. So I may say that when Torsten, when you say letting go, it's not only letting go of your routines, what you're used to do, your job, and Jim, you said the ego and all that, but you need to let go of many, many other things. And I think that that is crucial. Because I remember when also my first neighbors in Vienna were Americans, and I remember how frustrated this person was, the spouse of somebody working in foreign service, because shops were closed from Saturday 1 p.m. on, and all Sunday, and it was really I could see how much stress and there was in the family because something that was impossible to control, impossible to change. So yes, we need to let go. I always think of my favorite movie ever is Forrest Gump. And I always have this image of the feather at the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie. And I would say that transitions for me are very much that, that feather. Let yourself go. The wind will take you where you have to go. Be strong enough, the wind will put you up or down whenever you need to be, but be flexible, be adaptable. And just before I think that the question about being triggered, I think we talked about that at some point when we were doing the research or internally motivated. I think that yes, it has a role to play in the sense that whether you decide to move or you're moved or the transition is, but in the end, the processes, the internal processes will be the same. You have to go through the same self-discovery, self-realization, adaptation, letting go, to cope with the new circumstances and making the best out of them. So sorry, I didn't let Torsten or Jim jump on this one if they wanted, but as you know, Pari, in a few minutes I will have to leave the forum because of a very important commitment.
Elizabeth, yes, Elizabeth leaves in 5 minutes. We will come to you before you leave to ask you one last thing. Quickly, Torsten and Jim, the question of what are the main differences between externally triggered transitions and internally motivated ones? Would you like to take a go at that question?
Jim, do you like to?
The only thing I'm going to say is just one thing, and then I'll turn over to Torsten, is it's whether you have a sense of agency over it. If you feel like this is being imposed on you and you can't, and you keep that feeling, you are going to suffer mightily. So figuring out how you take ownership for it very quickly will help you.
I think what comes to my mind, hopefully you have a vision for your life of where you want to go. And if you have, part of this vision may be transitions that you kind of take into consideration and you plan for them, right? You can integrate them. You can mentally prepare before they actually come in. So in our case, we always knew we want to have a broad family, a big family. But it takes time until you get there, so you can gradually adjust for this and prepare for it and set up kind of the support systems, because that's something what I think is really important for transitions, to have a support system around you. When externally triggered, I think there's the challenge: how does it fit into your vision, into your life vision? And we just discovered with Jim, you contract with your inner circle, your wife, your family. How does the externally triggered one affect these contracts? And I think there's where the work needs to happen, to fit it in. If you want to accept it, to fit it into the vision, but then also to potentially reconnect, recontract, and adjust. And I think so it's a little bit more tricky.
Very nice. Thank you, Torsten, Elizabeth, and Jim. Jeff has a question. I'm going to hold it, Jeff, because Elizabeth's going to leave in a minute and I want to pull her in for one more question. I'll hold your question till after. Where I'd like all of you to give us some insights and share your experience is, I'd love to hear from you, looking back on your life transitions, leadership and life. Where was your biggest growth and transformation? And I'll start with Elizabeth, because I know you have to leave soon. Elizabeth, where was your biggest growth and transformation?
Well, I think that there were several occasions where there were big impacts in my personal life. One was when I decided to transition from being a clinician into a more public health, because I knew that was going to completely change the nature of what I was going to be doing, the organizations that would work, the people I would, coming from a pure medical environment to one where, for example, when I first worked with the UN back in my country, I lost my doctor title immediately. In the UN organizations, you don't use titles, Mrs. and Mr. And that was like, and Jim, I thought of that with, I'm a doctor, how come nobody's calling me a doctor? But then, yeah, like a feather, I let go of it. If I don't, nobody can take the fact that I'm a doctor. Moving to other countries, definitely the first time I moved to Vienna, there was a big change in my career, and I had to do so much in order to get a job. And I like what Torsten was saying, you have a plan, you have a vision, you know where you want to go. Because at that time, I was coming from my field of public health and working in mother and child health, and I went into an organization dealing with a topic that I was completely unfamiliar with, and a very hostile topic, the field of drugs. And that was for me, again, a new opportunity to learn, to grow, to understand a different world, and then to identify what do I have already, what part of my knowledge, my training, my experience so far can help me in this new field that is new for me. And that was a quantum leap in my career, in the sense that nowadays I'm an expert on this topic after 16 years. And I feel so confident in my own skin working and teaching others and working on policies, on programs with all sorts of people, from politicians to people in the health sector at all levels, trying to bring them to the understanding of this kind of work. So for me, that was a great change. And I would say that this last one, because of the personal implications, I have, like I said at the beginning, I think that I have proved myself through this process of transitioning in my career that I can do much more than I thought that I was aware of. And of course, that is not only a result of the transition per se, it's the result of my whole life and all these experiences accumulated. So, yeah, for me, it's an invitation to just be open, be receptive, don't be attached, and just flow.
Yeah, I know you have 2 minutes before you leave. Elizabeth has a hard stop at 6:15 our time. Elizabeth, your words of tips to share with our audience who are in the early years of their transition, the 20s and 30s and 40s, which are those rush hour and challenging years, what would you tell them?
Well, in the first question I responded that those were the most challenging years for me, because that's when you're making really the big decisions that will take you to what your career will be. There will be changes along the way, and I can tell you, I just explained how. But I think that in those years, you're so worried about, is this really the career I wanted? Am I really going to succeed? The competition is a big thing. At least in the medical field, competition, people who can really go into the private sector, people who cannot afford to even enter to start practicing in the private sector. So there were so many challenges. And of course, you are inexperienced, you are new in all of these. I think my advice is the same for the young people. Trust yourself. Life will teach you. Jobs will teach you. People, every person you come into contact with in your organization is a source of knowledge, is a source of experience. So use that. And I would say, I'm going to steal from Torsten, be faithful to your ultimate goals without being attached, but follow that desire where you want to go in your career and have a clear sense of what is your purpose. In my case, it is to heal, and there are so many ways of healing, yeah? And so find your calling and keep going, and be the feather.
That feather. I love that. That's a lovely metaphor. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
I need to leave. Sorry for that.
We know.
And thank you so much. It's been a
Thank you, Elizabeth.
experience.
Thank you so much. I know we have 15 minutes left. We will basically just cover these questions, take 1 or 2 questions at the end, and then we close. But I'd love to hear about your growth. Where was your biggest growth and transformation over your careers?
Well, as I was listening actually to Elizabeth, what came to my mind is I think the biggest growth comes when there's the biggest discomfort. I think it's this, the picture that I created in my mind is you have this well-oiled machine that you are in, you can call it comfort zone, and then this entire machine kind of falls apart and you need to rebuild it. And when it really falls apart completely, I think that's where the biggest discomfort is and where the biggest learning is. For me, I think it was actually in my rather early 20s when I moved cities. I started a new job in a different city. It wasn't my first job, so I made a deliberate decision for a new job in a different city, which was quite away, still in Germany, but quite away from where I was growing up and where I lived before. And this really took me completely out of my comfort zone. And I was afraid of it. But afterwards, I really, first of all, I had a learning of taking ownership of my life. And it opened up new ways that I was not able to see before. And I'm really grateful for this period in my life. Even so, I know that when I was in there, it didn't feel always there were a lot of moments where I was just by myself and not really sure, a lot of doubts, mind chatter, and so on. But overcoming those, and in hindsight now, I'm proud of myself, and this was, I guess, the biggest learning moment, where really whole person transition was happening, where I was completely pushed into something new.
Yeah, and you know, I was going to follow up with this question about how do you overcome fear, because at a younger age we don't have the skills to know, will it turn out right? There's so many doubts and anxieties and fears. What pushed you through it? How did you get through those?
It's a good question. I think I heard from Jim what the State Department is doing, like mentors. And if I relate to me, as it was a kind of personal transition, it's really about the support you have from your family, from good friends. And that's also one of the big recommendations I would give to young leaders, to talk about your transition, your emotions, your fears, your expectations, your excitement about it. So you're not alone. And I think just by sharing, you create a bigger kind of space where you invite others, and by inviting others, you feel support, you get support, you know who to turn to if there are these moments. And I had good friends, and there was kind of the safety net that was holding me and giving me strength, power, and recharging my confidence. I read in the chat confidence. I really love about this. So knowing who you are, what your strengths are, reconnecting to your strengths, knowing you are someone, you are a valuable human, and you can contribute. And sometimes we lose this confidence, and having someone who kind of supports us in recharging is extremely important.
Yeah, there's a very powerful exercise I remember once doing, and it was reach out to a number of people, 5 people in your network, and let them tell you what they see as your strengths and what your, and sometimes that's that confirmation, that's the support. You just need to hear that sometimes.
Yeah.
And I hand over to Jim. I know we're running short of time, but Jim, we'd love to hear for you on your transition in life. Where did you experience the biggest growth and transformation?
So I would separate that into 2 areas. One is the skills-based stuff, and I just learned that continuously, right? That really focusing on what skills do I need to do for this job, because I know that I almost failed a couple of times because I didn't know how to do silly things, like I didn't know how to do the budget, I didn't know how to run a good meeting. And so sitting down and realizing what skills do I need to do to succeed in these various things was very helpful learning for me. On just a personal growth basis, to me, the biggest learning happened in Guangzhou. I had some horrible bosses, and they did not play to my strengths. Let's just say that. And I did not play to their weaknesses. I didn't help them very much. And I made myself very sick. And so taking stock of what happened after the fact and realizing that as much as I would have liked to blame my bosses, I had to own most of the problem. That this was, I did not behave in the way that I needed to behave for all of our good. And so that was, again, that agency, that sense of what am I bringing to the situation, and just doing that very thoughtfully. That was my biggest learning, and that's helped me. That was in 2000, and it's been very transformational for the way that I lead and the way that I do transitions.
And just leading on from that question, what are the inner characteristics that serve you in a transition?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it really goes back to knowing yourself, right? And this is why I've so embraced coaching. I was a coaching manager. That's the way I managed, but becoming a real life coach and an executive coach has really taught me to focus on what you bring to each circumstance, right? And it's being honest with yourself, having your friends make sure you're getting good feedback on how you show up different places, and understanding that who you are affects those around you. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of what Torsten said as well.
Yeah.
It's being honest with yourself. It's being able to have that, sharing those emotions, sharing those with other people as well. And I think part of what you're saying is it's being self-aware, about who we are and what we are, and really tapping into that. So very, very.
And trying to be authentic, Brene Brown, stop being who you should be and be who you are is something that really resonates with me.
Very true. And I'll take Jeff's question before we close, which is, what would you see as some key success factors for individuals transitioning into the role as head of an organization?
That's a big question. It touches, I think, upon a lot of leadership capabilities and skills. What comes to my mind is, first of all, really to have a vision. To have a vision for yourself as the one who steps into this role of who you want to be, who you want to become. But of course, as you're leading the organization, a system, I call it the small family system, but this is the organizational system, to have a vision for this entire organization, and being able to create this followership for this vision. So first of all, to always connect back for yourself, to recharge yourself with this vision, and to invite others. I think that's a key one. The other one, which is really about being humble, being listening, being empathetic around what are the needs there, and how can you connect the needs of the organization, of the market, of the customers, of each employee to this vision of this going forward. This comes to my mind. So I think there's a lot of, what always comes to my mind is this explorer mindset, being curious, being humble, listening carefully, being agile. I think I heard it somewhere in the chat as well, kind of connecting what your expertise, because you're coming into this position because you bring something with you that is unique. So you bring some expertise, you bring some knowledge, something which makes you unique, and to connect this with what's required in the moment. Well, that's already a lot. I'm not sure it's simple, but that's why it's leadership.
Yeah. Thank you, Torsten. Jim, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I always have something to add. We should have a beer together. We can talk about this for hours. So I think the number one thing is, again, ask yourself why you're really doing this transition, right? That this is really an important question. Are you doing it for your ego? Are you doing it for the company? It gets to the heart of Torsten's the why question. The other is to really think about, it's like Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. What are you what new you are you reinventing as the boss? And what are you going to have to let go of, which is something I talk a lot to people who transition. You're going to be grieving for something, right? That as a visa guy doing hundreds of visas a day, man, I grieve for that loss of power. Everything was black and white. Oh my goodness. Yes or no, get out of my window and leave me alone. And all of a sudden, as a boss, you're dealing with nothing but gray. And there was lots of sadness in my heart for not being able to have clarity, right? That everything was all of a sudden gray. And the other is having a really good metaphor for what you're trying to do. So I love the gardening metaphor, right? That I don't want to be making, as a leader, of a large organization, I want to make the decisions up front. You know, what's our why? Where are we trying to get to? And then I want to delegate the rest of the decisions to the people who work for me. I don't want people to constantly come back and ask me for permission to do things. So I love the gardening metaphor, right? So I'm going to prepare the soil. I'm going to get us in the right sun space. We're going to till the ground. We're going to plant the seeds. We're going to water. We're going to weed. We're creating, as a boss, that's what I'm trying to do. Create that garden where you can excel and give you the tools that you need so that you can excel. And you know, I love the concept of servant leadership, right? It's not how do you help me be a better boss? It's how do I help you be the best you can be at what you're trying to do?
Yeah.
So it's ideally you already have that mindset, but you know, to me, having a very powerful metaphor for what you're trying to do helps you reconnect when you know that you're no longer living in that metaphor.
And I have to ask you, you did share that your metaphor, is that your metaphor, the gardener, or do you have another one for yourself?
Yeah, so so I am Hokulea, mischievous wayfinder who guides us home. So as a leader, it's about kind of pointing us in the right direction, the why. I love to be mischievous. I love to play around. And, we're going to get there together.
Yeah.
That's my promise to you. We'll get there together.
Very nice. Lovely words. We have 3 minutes. I know, Dua, you have asked a question, but if you don't mind, we won't take this question because we want to close a little bit. It is a good question on horrible bosses. Some people have already left and said thank you. I'd like to close with Torsten and Jim and just take a word from you, a word of advice. If you need to share advice with our audience who are going through transitions, what would you tell them?
Experiment. I think that comes to my mind. Experiment and try to not fall into mind traps. Kind of, if there's mind chatter, if there's stories, something that holds you back, kind of don't give it space. Come with a clear mind and just expose yourself into an experiment. Whether it works, whether it doesn't, I think I mentioned earlier, you'll progress anyhow. You'll learn, you'll grow in whatever manner. So experiment.
Thank you, Torsten. Jim?
So get a good coach, get a good mentor, and be kind to yourself. Give yourself some grace. If you're not making mistakes in transition and in life, you're not trying hard enough. But you got to be kind to yourself when you make those mistakes.
Yeah, also really powerful. Forgive yourself. Yeah. Give yourself permission to fail and learn from that. That I think is so powerful. We forget that. We're too hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself. Good, lovely words. Wow, thank you both so much. This was just so enriching. I have to say this, more in love with both of you than I was when we started this. So thank you for sharing your insights, everything. Thank you very much.
Thanks for hosting this, Pari.
Thank you. I'll just share quickly the slides because we have a quick a quote as well, closing. Just wanted to add, we did talk about the research. If this was interesting, if you'd like to talk more and explore this transition research, please connect with us. Our email is just info@Vienna Global Leaders. And this is really important, this discussion. It's how do we support other people through their transitions and make this a learning journey, make this transformational, make this an opportunity to learn. So we would love to hear from you. If you'd like to connect with us on that, please do. And just as a closing, Vienna Global Leaders, this is our last forum for 2021. We will be back in 2022 with new news and information. If you have any ideas of what you'd like to hear from us about, please write to us, let us know. And our final quote, closing on transition: if things start happening, don't worry, don't stew, just go right along and you'll start happening too, by our famous Dr. Seuss. So enjoy the ride, and we wish you very well. Thank you all for being with us. It was amazing having you here. Thank you for your questions. And a big thank you again to Torsten, to Jim, to Elizabeth, and to Khadija.
It was a
Very
pleasure.
big thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks, Torsten. Thanks, Pari. Thanks, Khadija.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See you soon. Have a good evening, good day, good afternoon, and we connect again
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.